Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to review the new Picard Countdown comic, which will be a prequel to the new Star Trek Picard show, taking place about a year before Picard retired from Starfleet, and it's about how he saved the Romulans from the supernova, which we first heard about in the Star Trek 2009 movie, and there was also a comic set before that movie explaining the events in the future right before that supernova. It was a 4-part comic explaining a lot of things. It explained how Nero got that ship, which was super advanced even for its time. It was upgraded with Borg technology. It also showed how Spock tried to save the Romulans and why Nero was so angry and so on. So it was a pretty good comic book. I think that one was actually better than this one, and also there's a whole bunch of contradictions between them and they don't really match together, and so they can't both be in the same continuity. And I gave it some thoughts, and I thought about maybe trying to come up with excuses to link it all together, but I realized that it's simply impossible, too many contradictions. So one of them would have to be not canon, basically. And I actually think the older one fit the continuity of the movie much better, because it fit the dialogue in the 2009 movie perfectly. And I can't see how this new one can fit that. But it's not yet finished, it's only the first issue out of 3, so maybe they will explain the rest of that stuff later. But before I discuss all these continuity issues, I want to give my overall thoughts on this new comic, which, as I said, is the first of 3, so maybe I like the next ones much better. But the first one, in my opinion, is not really that impressive, except for the ending. I did love the ending of it. The beginning wasn't very impressive in my opinion, so only in the end it became interesting. So it's revealed that Picard is organizing this armada to try to save the Romulan colonies from the upcoming supernova. Romulus itself is never mentioned, so I'm guessing the Romulan fleet itself will take care of that, but the Federation was invited to help evacuate other planets of the Romulans. We also see that LaForge is in charge of the Utopia Planitia shipyards at Mars, overseeing the construction of some kind of new fleet that will enable to evacuate all the Romulans, which does kind of make sense because if you calculate how many ships it will take to evacuate billions of people, I do think the normal Starfleet probably wouldn't be able to handle it. Because let's say Starfleet is able to send 1,000 ships, the size of the Galaxy class for example on average. Each such ship will probably be able to take about, let's say, 20,000 people to evacuate them. So multiply that by 1,000, that means 20 million people that they'll be able to evacuate in one journey from Romulan space to Federation space. I'm assuming the Federation has a lot more transport ships and civilian ships, but they are not fast enough to be able to go back and forth between these two quadrants. That's why I'm only counting the big and fast Starfleet ships. So let's say 1,000 ships, each of them carrying 20,000 people. That's only 20 million people that they can take, let's say, in 1 month. So in a whole year they'll be able to take around 200 million people, and the Romulans probably have billions of people on a lot of different planets, and that's why Starfleet needs a lot more ships, which does explain why they're building this new evacuation fleet. And this comic is taking place about a year before the supernova happens, and so that's why they have some time to do it. And so Picard is preparing everything with the Romulans, and the Romulans give him a lot of trouble because they want to keep secrecy. They still think they might be able to return to some of the planets later after the supernova shockwave goes away, I guess. They don't really explain it in detail, but I'm guessing they are thinking that they might be able to return to their planets later, and so they still want to keep all their secrets. They're not allowing Starfleet ships to scan their planets, they're jamming their scanners, they don't give them the exact details of everything, and so Picard has to deal with all of that. And he's visiting one of the Romulan colonies, and then the interesting part happens when it turns out that there are millions of primitive native people on that same planet, and the Romulans never even mention them. They only say they have about 10,000 Romulans on that planet, which Picard needs to evacuate, but then Picard discovers there's also 5 million sentient humanoid natives, and the Romulans treat them as slaves basically. They're working in their fields and stuff like that, and the Romulans say they are primitives, you don't have to worry about them. And then Picard says that they have to evacuate every sentient being, not just the Romulans. And then the Romulans get pissed of him and they throw him in jail. And that's the cliffhanger ending. And the clock is ticking because the supernova is approaching and all of that. So I did love that ending. I loved how the Romulans are the same old Romulans as before. And Picard is that optimistic, good-hearted, moral figure like in the TNG show, at least in most of it, because also one of the problems with this comic book is that it does seem like a small contradiction with a few episodes in TNG, which are episodes that I often complain about, in which Picard didn't want to save all kinds of primitive humanoids from planets which were about to go through some disaster. And that's the only few times I actually morally disagreed with Picard from TNG. Usually, the Picard in TNG was a very brilliant character, a very moral figure, a role model, all of that. I love the TNG Picard. But in a few episodes, namely in the episode Pen Pal and in the episode with Worf's adoptive brother, I forgot its name, in both those episodes there was some kind of natural disaster threatening to destroy a whole planet, and Picard said we have no right to intervene because of the Prime Directive. We cannot intervene to save them, and I always thought that's a totally immoral thing to do. And in both of those situations he did end up saving some of those people, but only kind of reluctantly. In the first example it was because Data made contact with some girl on that planet, and then Picard did decide to save that planet, only reluctantly as a favor to Data. And in the second example, Worf's adoptive brother beamed up a village of those people to the holodeck to transport them to another planet without them knowing. And Picard was totally against that idea, but he was forced into it, and then did save that whole village. But it wasn't his idea, and he was against that idea at first, and so those two episodes kind of ruin the morality of Picard, and contradict what we see in this comic book, because according to that TV show, the Prime Directive forbids you from helping people who did not yet reach the warp stage, who are primitives by Federation standards, who you should not be making first contact with, even if it means letting them all die. And so this comic book kind of contradicts that, because if these are indeed primitive people and did not yet reach warp level, then you are not allowed to save them, according to the rules of that TV show, which I always disagreed with. That's why I kind of like this comic despite this contradiction, because this is the correct version, this is the real humane and moral thing to do. If they are sentient beings, not just animals, it doesn't matter that they didn't yet reach warp level, you should still save them. Just like, today we don't yet have a warp drive, so if there's some kind of natural disaster, wouldn't you want aliens to save us? What if you knew there are aliens but they refuse to save us because they will say that we are still too primitive? That will be very evil to us. I always disagreed with that idea of letting primitive people die just because they didn't reach a technological level. And so that's why I'm willing to forgive this comic for kind of contradicting the continuity of the TV show, because I prefer this version of the Prime Directive, in which if a species is about to die, which is the worst thing that can happen to it if it goes extinct, and so you are allowed to even violate the Prime Directive to save that species. And also in this case, I think because those people know of the Romulans basically enslaved them, so they are aware of the existence of aliens, and so it wouldn't really destroy their culture if they know there are other aliens and they're about to go extinct, and so I do think it's the moral thing to save them. So we have that moral dilemma of Picard, that he was given a mandate to save the Romulans, but now he wants to save all those other indigenous people as well. And the Romulans get pissed off that he refuses to rescue them, and then they imprison him, and that's the cliffhanger ending of part 1. And so I did like that ending. And now let me talk about all the other contradictions between this comic and the older Countdown comic, which tied to the 2009 movie. So first of all, that older one was set in 2387. That's based on Spock's dialogue of when the supernova happened. And this new one is set in 2385, a year before the supernova and before Picard retired from Starfleet. So it doesn't exactly match Spock's dialogue, but it's close enough that I'm willing to forgive this one. However, another contradiction is that in the old comic, Picard was an ambassador, and here he's an admiral. Now maybe they'll explain it later in the next few parts. Maybe after he retires from Starfleet he does become an ambassador. Maybe it can still link to that old comic, but it will take a lot of mental gymnastics to do it, because in this one they say that the Romulans know about the supernova already. They know it's about to happen, and yet in that older comic the Romulan Senate didn't believe Spock when he told them about the supernova. They didn't do anything to evacuate their people, and that's why Spock took it upon himself to try to prevent that supernova, and also he had to tell Picard about it and all of that, and yet here Picard knows all about it. The Federation and the Romulans know all about it and are preparing to deal with it, so that's a continuity mistake. Also in the old comic they said that B4 turned into Data. Data basically resurrected in B4's body, and he became the captain of the Enterprise E. And here they mentioned the Enterprise E, but they never said who is the captain. So technically it's not a contradiction yet, I guess we'll wait and see. But based on the trailers for the Picard show, it seems as if Data is dead and never returned. He never came back. The Data that we saw in the trailer is some kind of dream by Picard or a simulation. And so I suspect it will be another contradiction with that comic. Also in the older comic, it was said that LaForge left Starfleet and became a civilian, and he was still designing ships, but not in Starfleet. And in this new one, we see that he's a commander of Starfleet, and he's in charge of the shipyards, building this evacuation fleet. So this is another contradiction, but we can assume because there's a year in between, maybe after the events in these comics, maybe that's when LaForge retired, and after that he designed the jellyfish that we saw in the 2009 movie. It was said that he's the one who designed it as a civilian. It's also a little bit fishy that he's only a commander here because, you know, he's been a commander for a lot of years, and also there was a Voyager episode set in the future in which we saw that he was a captain, even though that timeline was erased, and so he doesn't have to tie into that, but still it's kind of strange that he's only a commander in this time period. So they keep talking about the impending supernova in this comic, and so I remember at first I thought that maybe it exploded already. Maybe all of this is taking place after that older comic. Maybe LaForge came back to Starfleet, maybe Picard came back to Starfleet, that's what I thought at first. Because of the fact that they all know about the supernova, and in the old one they didn't know about it until it happened, and it was too late to evacuate anyone. So I kind of assumed maybe Romulus was destroyed already, and now they're talking about evacuating the other planets in the vicinity. And they keep saying there's a whole year before the supernova arrives to it. So I thought maybe the shockwave of the supernova is simply approaching these planets, but then wouldn't they know exactly when will it arrive? So I thought the supernova happened already, and they're simply waiting for the shockwave to arrive, and that's why they're evacuating other planets and why they never mentioned Romulus. But then I remember that Spock actually did stop the supernova. He was simply too late. It already destroyed Romulus, and then Spock used the red matter and turned it into a black hole, which sucked up the supernova. And so why would any other planet be threatened now? And so it doesn't really make sense. And so I'm guessing this new comic is taking place before the supernova even exploded. And yet they never mentioned Romulus itself directly. It's possible that it's been evacuated by the Romulan fleet itself, because that's probably the most elitist population, the richest people and all of that, they live on the capital planet. And so most likely the Romulan fleet itself is evacuating them, and the Federation is only allowed to evacuate all the other colonies. But I don't really see how will that tie with the 2009 movie exactly, because in that movie we saw glimpses of all those events, and it apparently was a total surprise for the Romulans. That their whole planet was destroyed without warning, they had no chance to evacuate, that's why Nero's family died, and that's why he wanted revenge. But if the events of this new comic book are what happened, and the Federation was actually helping to evacuate all the Romulans and to save them, then why was Nero so angry at the Federation? If he knew that for a whole year they've been evacuating all the Romulans, helping them out, and now he wants to destroy the Federation in revenge. And so it doesn't really make sense, it doesn't really match the 2009 movie, and that kind of annoys me, because then what's the point of even doing this whole story if it's not to tie with that? If it doesn't fit with that, then why do it at all? Why not do some other story completely? So I thought the whole point was to tie everything together, to fit the continuity together is one universe, but they can't even do that properly, and so I am a little bit annoyed at that. It also makes me worried about the actual TV show. If they not pay attention to any of the details, they get everything wrong. That makes me a bit worried for the TV show, which I am very looking forward to. I always said I want to see Picard back again, but this makes me a little bit worried. But I guess I'll wait and see what the next issues of this comic will show us. Maybe they will manage to somehow tie everything together in a logical way that won't contradict the 2009 movie, or maybe they'll even say this maybe is a whole new timeline. Maybe they prevented the supernova and so Nero never did go back in time. Maybe they got a message from the past, from Spock in the past, who warned them about all of this, and this is basically another timeline, not the same exact one as the 2009 movie. I guess we'll wait and see. I'm curious to see how they'll solve this. Most likely they will not. Most likely it will still have even more continuity issues, and I will cover that in detail once the next parts of these comics will become available. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comment section below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.